Hello everyone, Scott Donschikowski here, and today we got something a little different. This is the beginning of a new series that's going to be called Edit That. And the first thing we're going to take a look at are some pictures, as you can see here, of Death Valley. Death Valley is one of the more popular spots in California. National parks wise, it's not as popular as Yosemite. You don't really see the droves of people headed out to Death Valley, probably because it's very warm there, as you can imagine. But it's nonetheless a really cool spot. And in this first episode of Edit That, we're going to take a look at images of Badwater Basin. So Badwater is this really cool place. You see these sunset shots here where the salt flats look like this. They have these weird polygonal or hexagonal formations due to the evaporation and freeze and thaw cycle of the salt. It creates these ridges that kind of pop up. They're not everywhere out on the salt flats. But if you're determined to find them, you absolutely can. So I figured, why not start this new series with an image from Death Valley? Was just there not too long ago, and these are some of the images that I grabbed from a pretty nice sunset there. One thing that's kind of typical about this area is that don't pay attention to the weather reports. If the weather says it's going to be clear, there's a high possibility that it's not going to be. You kind of get these high wispy clouds overhead, and in fact, for the week that we were there shooting, the weather report was clear every day. So lucky enough that we got some nice sunset clouds. Okay, so first things first, I've gone ahead and just loaded these images into Lightroom, put them in a quick collection so that that's really all we see. And the first time that you're out in a place, especially something as weird as this, it just pays to take some time and kind of explore the space. I walk around typically with my camera, with my eye pointed through the viewfinder of the camera, just kind of taking a look and see what the camera sees. And then once I'm kind of confident in something that I like, I'll set the camera up on a tripod and then kind of go from there. So this is what it looked like when the sun actually set. And I'm a fan of using Lightroom to combine images to make a high dynamic range image. I try to keep the final image to something that looks kind of natural. So that's kind of what we have here. So what we're going to do is we're going to find some images here. 1, 2, 3. And then we're just going to process them. And that's basically the gist of this series. All right, so let's start off then by just clicking these 3 images here. So that's you click on the first image and then hit Shift on your keyboard and then click on the last image. So these 3 right here, we got an under, a middle, and an over. And then I'm just going to right click and I'm going to say Photo Merge HDR. It's that simple. Let me move that HDR window over here so you can see what's happening. All right, so now we have this HDR options window. Now I'm going to pick auto align even though I'm on a tripod, taking all 3 images on a tripod. The deghost section here is really good if stuff is moving. And since I'm on a tripod and things are moving very slow, if at all, you don't really need that. So I'm just going to click none to that. And I don't want to have this auto settings thing on, this auto tone. We're going to deal with that in a second. So auto align is the only thing I'm going to click here. And we're going to click merge. We're going to have those images pop up in a second. All right, there we go. There's our DNG. So basically what this has done is it's taken all 3 of these raw images and sort of combined the dynamic range into this raw image here. It is, for all intents and purposes, I think a 32-bit image. It's very similar to if you were to send these to Photoshop and do an HDR in Photoshop. There's an option in Photoshop called 32-bit HDR. It's basically the same thing, except in Photoshop the output is a TIFF file. Here the output is a DNG. All right, so now that we have our DNG, you can see nothing special yet. It looks very much like one of the raw images, but when we hit develop, or click on develop or hit D on your keyboard to go to develop, this is where the magic happens. All right. So first things first, I'm going to come over to lens corrections. This is the first thing I always do. I'm going to hit remove chromatic aberration and enable profile corrections. All right, that's the first thing. Next, we're going to scroll back up. We're going to go to basic, and we're going to start to mess with the tonality. So like almost every image I work with, highlights down, shadows up, and that's basically to squish the dynamic range down towards the middle, and then we're going to pull it apart manually using whites, blacks, clarity, contrast, dehaze, stuff like that. Okay, so actually let's just do dehaze first. That's one of my favorite effects. So we're going to go here, and we're just going to increase the dehaze amount. Let's put this at like 35. That looks very nice. Okay, then I'm going to go to transform, and I'm just going to hit auto to see what auto does. It doesn't look like it did anything. Oh, little tiny bit there. I think my horizon's pretty straight, so maybe we'll just leave that off. The way that I work in Lightroom is to work from big to small to you. So whatever the most offensive thing in the photo is to you, you should fix that first. If that happens to be chromatic aberration, do that first. If it happens to be the horizon, do that first. Whatever the biggest kind of thing that you notice that needs to be changed, don't save that till the end. If it's way down in the panels here, it doesn't matter. Get rid of that thing first. It's just going to annoy you the whole time that you process the image. All right, so we'll go back up to basic, and I'm already starting to notice here that there is going to be a problem with the dynamic range in this image. I want the sky to look like this, right? But I want the foreground to be much lighter. I want that white salt to be more apparent. I don't really care about the detail all that much in the mountains, and I want this to be a little darker. So I want the top to be darker. I want the bottom to be lighter. And there's really no way to do that unless you start using some of these more advanced tools over here, like the graduated filter. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to use a multitude of these graduated filters to sort of fix certain parts of the image. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to grab our grad filter, and we're going to reset it. Just make sure all of these are reset. And we're going to drag from the bottom up. And I'm going to hold the shift key while I do this to get a nice level or straight line. Well, a line is straight, but a straight line like this on the horizon. And then I'll let go. And then we're going to do whites. We're going to bring up the whites here so that this section gets a little lighter. Now that's not quite white enough, so we're going to up the exposure to, let's do a third of a stop, 0.33. That's pretty good. Let's try a half, 0.5. Ooh, even better. All right. So that's looking really nice now. Zoom in here to make sure we have a nice sharp image, and we do. One of the mistakes I see people make in Death Valley, like in this place, is they want to shoot on the ground. And that's fine if you're experimenting. Me personally, I think that you should shoot at eye level. When you shoot down towards the bottom here, you know, on the ground, you don't really get the depth of all of the polygons that you do from when you're shooting from a much higher vantage point. So I typically tend to shoot at eye level, keep the tripod pretty high so that I can see all of this detail here. This gets lost if you move down towards the ground. You obviously get more in your immediate foreground, but you lose everything from about a foot away onto infinity. So I tend to keep my tripod pretty high, and that's why it looks like this. All right, let's grab our white slider and kind of brighten up the overall image a little bit more. That looks a little natural, and then we'll take our black slider and we'll drop that down a little bit. I'm holding the Option key or the Alt key when I do this, and that's why you're seeing this white screen like this, right? So if I go all the way down while I'm holding the Option or Alt key, you see these pixels here. That means that all these pixels are going to be black. So if I let go, that's what it looks like. A little too much. All you really need is just a little tiny bit like that there. And that looks pretty good. Whites is the same thing, right? Hold down the Option or Alt key and then slide. So all that'll be white if I let go, right? Way too much. So we'll back that off quite a bit just to make it look a little natural there, because the sun is right there. And we'll back that off a little bit more there. That looks very nice. All right, now we're going to go back and we're going to readjust this grad filter because the bottom is still not as light as I'd like it to be. So let's try 0.75. Pretty good. Well, let's just try 1. Much better. All right, now our salt is white. Now I'm going to increase this a little bit. There. Looks very nice. Let's zoom in here to see what that looks like. That's not too bad. It's a little noisy, which is kind of suspect. We shot this at ISO 100. That's not too bad at all. All right. Very, very nice. So then we're going to deal with color. Now, if I just increase my vibrance here, that's going to make the image look a little more bluish. So we don't really want to do that down at the bottom. What does saturation do? Sort of the same thing. I think I'm going to leave it somewhat like this because we are going to take it in Photoshop and we are going to kind of enhance it a little bit in Photoshop as well. Let's increase the contrast a little bit more here, just kind of a general contrast adjustment, and make this down here, back here a little darker. And then we're going to mess with our white balance here. We're going to see what we can do. Maybe we'll bring this up. It was at 6,000. Let's try 6,500. That's pretty nice. And then we'll increase the tint as well to give it a little purplish hue. We'll go from 6 to 10. That looks very nice. And then our backslash key is our before and after. Before and after. That's a pretty significant adjustment. I'm not liking the color in the sky here, so we're going to use another grad filter, and this time we're going to drag from the top down, like so. And again, I'm holding the Shift key, and we're going to cool off the top a little bit, like that, maybe -8 or so. And then we'll give this a little bit of pink as well. Maybe we'll go +5. That's pretty nice. Let's go a little more. Let's go 10. What does that do? I like that. Cool. All right, so there is our shot. Kind of zooming in here just to see if we missed any color. We'll take care of this in Photoshop. Little dust particles. That looks pretty good. So I'm not going to touch the saturation or the color in this just yet, because we are going to go into Photoshop, and the technique that I'm going to use in Photoshop is going to enhance the color anyway. But if you wanted to stop right here, you could definitely just, you know, well, I probably wouldn't want to do it down here. So I'd open up the grad filter again. I would click on the filter that is on the top and bottom, and then I might increase the saturation up there just to kind of pull out more color in the top there. That's pretty good. And then I might be finished with that. This looks a little funky. It's not too terrible though. But that's not what we're going to do. So I'm going to go back to that filter. I'm going to put that saturation back at 0, hit done. And this is about where I'm going to stop in Lightroom. So now what we're going to do is we're going to right click, edit in Photoshop. And we're going to take this image into Photoshop and kind of finalize it. All right. Now that we're in Photoshop, we're going to do the Orton Glow technique. There is a separate video on that. And so let's start doing that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to Control or Command J to duplicate this layer here. We're going to name the bottom layer Sharp, and we're going to name the top layer Blur. All right. Turn off the blur layer by hitting the little eyeball icon there. Click on the Sharp layer, and we're going to go to Filter, Sharpen, Smart Sharpen. And now we're going to tweak our sharpening. So there's before, there's after, before, after. And all I'm doing is holding down the mouse. So click and hold, then you have before, let go, you have after. This looks pretty good. Amount 250, radius of 2, and reduce noise at 3 or 30%. The higher you move the radius, the more you're going to get sort of this look, which is what you don't want. So we're going to put that back to 2, kind of pretty modest sharpening, and we're going to click OK. Now look at our floor here. Very nice. Really, really nice and sharp. And that takes care of our sharpening. Then what we're going to do is we're going to turn on our blur layer. And in fact, if I zoom in here, we can turn on and off the blur, which is not blurred yet. So this layer here has no sharpening. So since it's on top, you'll see that it's just overriding the sharp layer because it's sitting on top. So if we make that layer invisible, we see the sharp layer, which is really nice now. All right, so we'll go to our blur layer, turn that on, and we're going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And with a radius of 30 pixels, we're going to hit OK. And basically all this is doing is just to get rid of all of the detail. That's really it. For a further explanation on why you'd want to use this technique, watch that video linked above for the Orton effect or Orton glow. All right, so we're going to turn this off. We're going to hit our sharp layer. We're going to go to channels, and we're going to Command or Control click on RGB, and that gives us a luminosity mask for the lights in the image. We're going to go back to layers, click on our blur layer, and then hit the layer mask icon, and then we're going to turn it on. Now we have our blur, but if you remember from that video, if you've watched it before, the blur is too many places. So we're going to click on our blur layer, change the blend mode to soft light. And now we have the image that we're looking for. There we go. There's before, after. And you can see how it saturated the colors a little bit more as well. That's what we're going for. Okay. Now we're going to clean up some of the artifacts up in the corners and whatnot. So to do that, I'm going to hit Command Shift Option E or Control Shift Alt E, and that's going to do something called Stamp Visible. So it's basically taking these two layers here and combining them and then copying the result and placing it up here. So that's what this layer 1 is. So I can rename this one Merged, and then we can zoom in over here and grab our spot healing brush tool and make our brush a little bigger, and then just click, get rid of that piece of dust. And we're just going to scan the image here and find any other pieces that are moving with the image as I scroll around here. Not too many, which is good. Kind of tells me I don't need to clean my camera. All right, that's nice. Check the mountains here. Oh, looks like there's one right there. Oh, there's another one. Okay, and we probably don't have any here that we need to get rid of. All right. So that's that done. And that's basically it. That's all I'm really going to do to this image in Photoshop. Then we're going to close it, hit yes to save. And then when we go back to Lightroom, we have our DNG here. And then there is our edited version in Photoshop. So there's kind of before Photoshop, after Photoshop. And I hope you'll agree. Let's go full screen here. There's before, after. I hope you'll agree that the after with the glow is a better result. We'll go back to our grid, and I'm going to hit 9 on the keyboard with that TIFF file selected to give me a blue color label so that when I start looking at all these images, I can see that this one is the final version. And at this point, if you really wanted to, you can go back to develop and you can sort of tweak your image. Now I might want to do that with the blues, so maybe I'll go to HSL, go to luminance, blue, and maybe we'll drop the blues down a little bit. No, that's not really helping. Let's do saturation. Let's try to increase the saturation. Nope, that's not working either. Just want to do something, maybe enhance this little bit over here. It's a little bright and it's a little not saturated. So maybe we'll take the adjustment brush and we'll turn auto mask off and we'll decrease the temperature and we'll just sort of, there we go. Look at that. That's looking nice. Oh, let's delete that and start again. Make this a little smaller. And we'll sort of paint all this right here. Maybe over here. And you can see I'm painting on the mountains. That's okay. We're gonna clean that up. I'm gonna drop the flow of this down to 50. And I'm gonna give one kind of big swipe over here with a large brush. Like that, yeah. Maybe one or two. And then maybe one right there. Okay. So then I'm going to hit the erase tool. I'm going to hit show mask overlay and I'm going to clean up this section here. So to do that a little better, I'm going to zoom in, make my brush a little bigger, turn auto mask on, and then I'm just going to paint in the mountains here. And we're going to try to remove that adjustment from the mountains. Like so. Because I don't want that color shift in the mountains, only in the sky. And auto mask is going to help with that so you don't paint in the sky. Just be very careful not to let the middle where that minus is to deviate from the mountains. The rest of the circle is okay if you have auto mask turned on. All right, let's turn that mask off. There we go. So now we can, let's turn this off and on, this little dial here, and we can see what we did. We just sort of blued up the sky a little bit. Now let's see what happens if we increase the saturation. That looks pretty nice. There we go. That's very nice. And we'll click that tool. Maybe we'll go back to our adjustment brush, or sorry, the grad filter, and maybe we'll knock down a grad filter right about there and increase the saturation here too, just a tiny bit, right about like that. Nice. And then our before, so this is coming right from Photoshop. I'm hitting the backslash key, and after, before, after. I like that result. That's really nice. And there we have it. There's our finished Badwater Basin photo. Hope you guys enjoyed. Click subscribe if you like the content, you want to see more. Give me a comment down below. And if you are subscribed, click the notifications bell so that you get emailed every time I upload a new video. That's it for me, guys. Happy shooting. See you next time.